And what happens is that they're frustrated because of corruption, governments making promises that they don't keep, overtaxation, overregulation, and frankly lying. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "I'm not upset that you lied to me, I'm upset that from now on I can never believe you." And isn't that the case, the way it is with government? They tell you things and then they don't follow through. And we're in this campaign period right now where we see these leadership candidates making promises that they may not be able to keep or won't keep because that's not their value system. Are they poll-based leaders or are they principle-based leaders? These are questions that are really important to understand. Maggie Thatcher was a principle-based leader. Now, some of you may know Jack Mintz, the chair of public policy at the University of Calgary. And he determined in a study that ending our hydrocarbon industry is going to result in a 1/3 reduction in the average income of Albertans. And we know what the plan is already because we've been told that there's going to be a 42% reduction in our hydrocarbon industry by 2030. And we're already hearing about the 30% reduction in fertilizer output. And along with that, there are many other concerns that we have. For example, the censorship bill, C-21, that's coming up. Bill 11, the firearms bill. There are 367,000 firearms owners in this province. I'm one of them. How many of you here are firearms owners? And how are you going to feel about giving up your firearms? That's your property. The federal government has said to us that we are not entitled to own property. And when you think about property and you recognize this statement that we're all born equal in the eyes of our Creator, endowed by natural law, amongst which are life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness, the number one property that you have is your body. And your right to your body was abridged with the COVID-19 mandates. I don't know if you realize that. And why did that happen? That happened because of Section 1 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which permits the government to override those individual freedoms and rights. You thought you had individual freedoms and rights, but you didn't, because Section 1 of the Charter allowed the government to override those rights. Now, Brian Peckford has pointed out, because he's one of the co-authors of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the 1982 Constitution Act, he points out that the reason for that Section 1 statement in the Charter had to do with an act of war, not because of a flu. So these are the kinds of things that are happening, and it's going to get much worse, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. But I'm going to tell you right now that we are truly facing an existential threat to our very way of life, to our individual freedoms, rights, and prosperity, and our economic well-being if we do nothing. And the Alberta Prosperity Project, just so you understand, is governed by the Alberta Prosperity Society, which is a registered society with a board of governors of 11 individuals, a couple of constitutional lawyers, etc., etc. But the purpose of the Alberta Prosperity Project is to unite and educate all Albertans, businesses, and organizations to protect their interests, their individual freedoms, rights, prosperity, and self-determination by enabling Alberta to chart a new path forward that will constitutionally absolutely protect those individual freedoms and rights. And that new path forward is a path forward along the lines of independence. We're going to talk about the two independence options in a minute. So right now, we're facing a dilemma. And it reminds me of going back to 2003 when I drafted a document for Ralph Klein. Ralph and I were very good friends, and I was chatting with him at the annual general meeting in Red Deer in 2003 in January, and I said to him, Ralph, I think I've got an idea how to fix the dysfunctional relationship between Alberta and Canada. Which I hear about. He says, you do? And I says, yeah. And he says, absolutely. And I said, well, okay, Ralph, it's based on this question. If you were the president or the prime minister of the sovereign country of Alberta, and Canada came to you and said, we would like Alberta to join Confederation under the current terms and cost of membership, would you? And he looked at me and he smiled, and I always remember his answer. He said, to ask the question is to know the answer. Of course not. So I said to him, well, if you wouldn't join Confederation under the current terms and costs of membership, don't you think you have a moral and an economic responsibility? You and caucus have a moral and economic responsibility to Albertans to fix this dysfunctional relationship? And he says, yeah, I guess we do. And so at that time, I said, well, I'm drafting this document. When it's done, I'll give you a call and we'll meet. So 3 months later, 61 pages drafted, ran it through constitutional lawyers, engineers, professionals of many types, academics, other politicians like Don Mazankowski, who's a friend of mine. And then I met with Ralph in August of 2003. By the way, if anybody wants to see it, just give me your email address, I'll send it to you. And the title of the document was Alberta at the Crossroads, Status Quo, Refederation, meaning fix our circumstances in Confederation, Autonomy, meaning at that time, independence for Alberta untethered to Canada. So I met with Ralph. We spent about 2 hours chatting about it. Then he asked me to present, if I'd be interested in presenting to caucus, and I said, sure. And so I got going with my secretary, and we started creating a PowerPoint presentation. And I got a call from the chief of staff 2 or 3 weeks later, and he said, you're not going to present to caucus. And I said, why is that? And he says, well, your document is about independence. And I said, no, it isn't, Peter. It's about leverage. So we're going to get to that in a bit. At the end of the day, I wasn't able to present to caucus. And at that time, things were a little bit different, because you'll remember when Ralph resigned, Alberta had $36 billion in cash and assets on the books. It was the #2 GDP per capita region in the world, the lowest unemployment in history, a AAA bond rating. And there was no incentive at that time, to do something different. So let's look at where we are now in the context of what I just said, because I've been thinking about these things since the 1980 National Energy Policy right up until now, and I've watched what's happening to all of us, and I'm not very happy about it, and I think many of you are not very happy about it, but the question is what do we do about it? So here's what we can do. We have to first understand what's going to happen if we do nothing. So we're facing 3 options ahead of us. One is the do nothing option, and the other is 2 potential independence options. The do nothing option is really this. It is the option of the agenda. The original agenda was, I believe, 2010, and then there was the 2021 agenda, and then there's now Agenda 2030. And this is the WEF UN Agenda 2030, euphemistically called the Great Reset. How many people here are concerned about the Great Reset and don't want it to happen? Okay. How many people here know the details about the Great Reset? Some of you do. Okay. Well, just to be sure that everybody is on the same page here, the WEF UN Agenda 2030 is a highly influential movement by the global elites of the World Economic Forum and the United Nations under a contract that they've signed, which is Agenda 2030. The purpose of which is to reset the global economy and to restructure the very fabric and function of society using banks, using governance agencies, and evaluating what's going on using environmental, government, and social metrics to control billions of people. So here's the way it'll work. You'll be given a digital ID. That digital ID will track you not only in a way in which they will know everywhere you are, but in addition, everything that you do and what you purchase. Then you'll also be given what's coming is a programmable digital currency. And that programmable digital currency will permit the government to bypass the bank to control what you buy, when you buy, how much you buy, and if you can buy. where you travel, how far you can travel, and if you can travel and by what means. And if it sounds far-fetched, I have to tell you, I didn't believe all this myself in the beginning, but there it is in black and white on the World Economic Forum website. So you can read it for yourself. So in essence, you will be pinned, you will be cataloged, categorized, tracked, and controlled in everything that you do. And that is what is coming by 2030. This is the plan, and it's already started. Digital IDs are already been implemented in Alberta in certain circumstances, such as your healthcare records and AMA registration renewals and that sort of thing. But it's coming in a much more sweeping fashion if we let it. ATB is now working with the federal government to broaden the scope of the digital ID. So that is one thing. And as Klaus Schwab, the head of the Economic Forum, has said to you guys, and I'm sure many of you have heard this, it's basically a famous statement now, they will own nothing and be happy. Please raise your hand if you'll be happy owning nothing. I see no hands raised. So I would assume, therefore, that that's not something that you would be in favor of, and so you're concerned about this. One of the things that I saw as well, which bothered me as a cardiac surgeon, operating on people, trying to keep them alive and improve their quality and length of life, which is what I did for 30 years in my career, operating on over 7,000 patients. I was particularly alarmed by a statement by the World Economic Forum in a video in which the gentleman speaking, and I use the term gentleman loosely here, stated, "We need to eliminate billions of people. They will find peace in the grave." And so, again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but you've got to think about what's coming. For example, let's consider the COVID-19 mandates. And you're aware of the problems that have occurred, the complications and the death rates that are occurring. Put this in the context of eliminating fossil fuel use, all in the name of climate change. And what that's going to do to the survivability of people in certain climates, whether it's hot or cold. And think about what reducing and eliminating our use of fertilizer is going to do. Think about what's coming with respect to the plan to eliminate or dramatically reduce the livestock industry. What does this sound like? Does it sound like a potential culling of the population? And I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying, think about it and make your own decision about what is coming. And so, and what's coming is very fast. 2030 is less than 8 years away from us. I like to think about Alberta. Some of you have heard this metaphor. I like to think about Alberta as a canoe on the Niagara River, and you're the inhabitants. All Albertans are the inhabitants of this big canoe on the Niagara River. And you know which way it's going. And eventually you're going to hear the rush of the falls, right? But if you all pull together in the same direction, you can get that canoe to shore. If we don't pull together, we're going over the abyss, over the falls into the abyss of the Great Reset. And that is what is coming. And you don't have to take my word for it. You know, you see it on many different news channels, this whole concept of the Great Reset. And it is coming. It's coming at us like a freight train. And what are our options, therefore? Well, what can we actually do? Can we fix our circumstances in Confederation and resist what is coming and fix the other problems that are plaguing us? For example, Bill C-69, Bill C-48, the pipeline and tanker ban, can we fix that? Can we end equalization? Can we fix our Canadian healthcare system that functions in the lowest quartile of quality at the highest quartile of cost? Can we get rid of the carbon tax? Can we take control of federal taxation? Can we do any of these things that will improve the quality of our lives? It is possible, yes, we can. Now let me pose a question. This is important. How many people here would like Alberta to remain in Confederation, remain in Canada, but with control of its wealth and control of its affairs? Raise your hand, please. Right, a significant number of people. How many people who have raised their hand think it is possible to achieve that? Fewer, okay? All right, and how many people would like Alberta to become a new sovereign constitutional republic? Okay, great. Now let's examine both of these paradigms from this perspective. Let's think about ending equalization as a metaphor for fixing Alberta, for ending these other programs that are harming us and having control of our wealth. So let's just pick ending equalization right now because, well, let's face it, in October we had a referendum and you folks voted in favor of ending equalization. Nothing's happened yet, has it? So let's examine why nothing has happened and what could be done different. So we're going to examine ending equalization through the lens of history, the structural electoral imbalance, and the constitutional hurdles. So when we look at history, first of all, and we're thinking about ending equalization, think about what happened in the beginning, because the fix has been in, folks, since Alberta joined Confederation, joined Canada. Now, the individual who you probably don't know, who is responsible for bringing Alberta and Saskatchewan into Confederation, was a gentleman by the name of Sir Clifford Sifton, who was the Minister of the Interior of the Liberal government of Sir Wilfrid Laurier. But what he said in 1904 is really important to understand, because when you understand what he said in 1904, you will then understand why we are where we are now. What he said in 1904 are these words, and I quote, "We desire, and all Canadian patriots desire," Canadian patriots at that time were those people living in the regions of Quebec and Ontario. "So we desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, that the great trade of the prairies shall go to enrich our people in the East, to build up our factories and our places of work, and in every legitimate way contribute to our prosperity." We started off as a colony in 1905, and we're a colony 117 years later. Now, and sadly, not one federal or provincial government has ever been able to protect our individual freedoms, rights, prosperity, or self-determination. Why? Because there's an imbalance in power between the provinces and the federal government. Now, there's one more point of history that's very, very important to understand why we are where we are now, and whether there's any possibility of ending equalization or any other programs that harm us. And we got to go back to the 70s to think about this. In the 70s, Alberta was booming. There was a massive demographic shift of people and businesses coming to Alberta. And why not? There was literally liquid gold in the streets. It was a land of opportunity. All 5 major banks were moving their head offices to Calgary. CIBC did. But what was happening in Alberta conflicted with what was happening in Quebec, with the Quebec secessionist movement. So no matter what you think of Pierre Elliott Trudeau or his finance minister, Marc Lalonde, or the financial elites of Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal, they were terrified that Alberta was becoming the center of economic power. And so what did they do? They implemented the national energy policy. Ostensibly, the national energy policy was implemented in order to transfer wealth from Alberta to poorer regions in the country so that they would have comparable social programs. Seemed very altruistic and a nice thing to do, and Canadians were terminally nice. So that happened. But you have to understand, folks, the truth of the national energy policy was 2 things. Number one, it was to ensure that Alberta would not become the center of economic power in Canada, and to buy Quebec's loyalty to Canada with Alberta's wealth, which is why Quebec gets 2 of every $3 of equalization. And did the federal government care that there was massive businesses that went belly up and that people committed suicide and they were devastated, they lost their businesses, or many businesses just moved out? Did that matter? Not at all. Not at all. This is what we're dealing with if we do nothing. Now, for those who think we can end equalization or fix Alberta's circumstances in Confederation, think about those facts. There are many others, such as, for example, $275 billion of planned investment into Alberta, which dried up because of federal government overreach. Let's now look at the structural electoral imbalance, thinking about ending equalization. As you know, we do not have representation by population. PEI elects one federal MP for every 40,000 population. Alberta elects one MP for every 130,000 population. How is that fair? It's no better in the Senate. BC and Alberta have 25% of the population, 11% of the Senate seats. What does that mean for all of us? It means this: every federal election will be decided by voter-rich Quebec and Ontario, and it's usually over by the time it hits the Ontario-Manitoba border. And it doesn't matter which party wants to get into power or which party is in power, they will always pander to the wishes of Quebec and Ontario at Alberta's expense. So now we know a little bit of history, we know a little bit about the structural electoral imbalance, thinking about is it possible to end equalization. Let's look at now where the rubber meets the road. The constitutional hurdles, there are 5. So in order to fix the kinds of problems that Alberta is facing, and other provinces as well, but particularly Alberta, we need to open and change the Constitution to suit Alberta. And this is what is required. The federal government, the House of Commons, has to agree to open the Constitution and change it to benefit Alberta. Number 2, the Senate has to agree to ratify what the House of Commons wants. Number 3, 7 of 10 provincial legislatures, representing 50% of the population, also have to vote in favor of opening the Constitution and changing it to suit Alberta, to end equalization in this case. How do you think Quebec will vote? Pretty obvious, right? And that brings up Quebec itself as the 4th hurdle. Quebec believes that it has a veto, even though it did not even sign the 1982 Constitution Act. And they proved that they have a veto a few months ago when they passed in their legislature Bill 96, which abridges the Canadian Constitution and eliminates minority language rights in Quebec. And the federal government will not challenge that. Now, that brings up the 5th hurdle, the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is obviously the Supreme Court of the land, and it would be the court that adjudicates a constitutional battle, say between the provinces and the federal government, or between provinces, if it's a constitutional issue. Think about how the Supreme Court is constituted. All of the justices are appointed from the Prime Minister's office. There are 9. 3 come from Quebec, 3 from Ontario, 1 from the Maritimes, and 2 from all of Western Canada. How do you think the Supreme Court would adjudicate an issue, a constitutional issue, between Alberta and the federal government? In Alberta's favor? Unlikely, very unlikely. And the proof of that, not that long ago, was the provincial government ruled, not the provincial government, but the Court of Appeal in Alberta ruled that a carbon tax was unconstitutional. The federal government challenged that and submitted the case to the Supreme Court. And how did the Supreme Court rule? That it was legal and constitutional. And the federal government has been abridging our authority in environmental issues and many other issues. Even Canadian healthcare is a provincial issue in the Constitution, but they override it with the Canada Health Act. Now, there have been 2 attempts to change the Constitution in the past. One was the Charlottetown Accord and the other was the Meech Lake Accord. They both failed. So now we have history, we have an understanding of the electoral imbalance, and now we understand the constitutional hurdles. So you can imagine if Jason Kenney took his equalization referendum and went to Ottawa, and it wouldn't matter if he was on one knee or two knees in front of Trudeau, do you think that he would agree to ending equalization, or that it would be possible? You have to answer that question in your own mind. So for those who would like Alberta to remain in Confederation but with a much better deal, please just understand the challenge that is there. But I'm going to give you a slimmer of hope in a second. So the alternative, folks, is for Alberta to chart a new path forward as an independent, sovereign, constitutional republic. But neither of these paradigms right now is possible. But it can be possible, and it's up to you folks. And I'm going to pose three questions right now that are going to take us to what can be done. So the first question is, how many here would like the next provincial government, and we as APP are completely agnostic as to which party forms government. We're nonpartisan. But I'm asking this question. How many people here would like the next provincial government, whichever one it is, to be in a position of strength for the first time in 117 years to protect your interests, your individual freedoms and rights, your prosperity, and your self-determination? How many people here would like that? Okay. The second question then is, would you be prepared to give the next provincial government a mandate to achieve question one? All right. Now let's talk about the only thing that can work. How many here would be willing to give a mandate to the next provincial government consequent to a successful referendum on independence? Okay. Now, what does that do, that successful referendum on independence? This is what it does. It forces the federal government to negotiate with Alberta, wherein Alberta is now negotiating from an equal position of strength, because that successful referendum gives the government the moral and legal legitimacy to negotiate in good faith with the federal government. And when you examine the Clarity Act, you will see that the Clarity Act basically was an act that occurred consequent to the federal government. It was called the Quebec Secession Reference. So they referred this particular concern about Quebec separation to the federal government to say, could it unilaterally declare declaration? That the Clarity Act therefore defines the legal pathway for a province to leave Confederation. But the key part of it is the compulsory negotiations that have to occur. So therefore, with a successful referendum on independence, the next provincial government could say to the federal government, we have this successful referendum on independence. We would like to negotiate our exit from Canada. And when you look at the fifth paragraph of the Clarity Act, it says negotiations might lead to a province leaving Canada. Might. That means, therefore, that those negotiations could lead to a far better deal for Alberta within Confederation, which satisfies the paradigm of people who would like Alberta to stay in Confederation. And if those negotiations don't work after a 6 to 12 month period, just like Brexit, negotiated for, I think it was a 1 year period, and then the negotiations failed, and England said, we are our own sovereign nation, we're not a part of the European Union anymore. And so if negotiations don't work after 6 to 12 months, then Alberta can unilaterally declare its independence. So that's basically the way in which this could happen. Now, if we think about how we would actually achieve this, in terms of the next, electing an independence-focused government, that independence-focused government can take control of that which it can legally and constitutionally, and then try and negotiate on the things that really matter to Albertans. And demonstrating the intransigence of dealing with Ottawa on the things that matter to you folks, that will then lead to the provincial government asking you all for a mandate to negotiate from a position of strength. And there's another way that you can give that next provincial government a mandate, and that's by signing the petition to hold a referendum, which then can be submitted to the provincial government. So it can happen in two ways. Now, what is the Alberta Prosperity Project trying to do to assist educating people? Well, we started this program, although we've been working on it for a couple of years, even though Shannon was right, it actually formally started in Nisku about 18 months ago. It actually started a couple of years ago because we were drafting the material at that time. Nevertheless, what happens is that at what the Alberta Prosperity Project has now done, we've conducted over 100 events, webinars, seminars, podcasts, interviews, etc. We've had over 5 million engagements on social media. We've created 140 educational chapters throughout the province to share this educational message to people. And in addition to that, we've engaged with Rebel News, and we've engaged contractually with Rebel News and the Western Standard, as well as paid social media, and we have contracts available with Touch Broadcasting Canada and digital billboard advertising. Because the key point, folks, is if you can't engage somebody, you can never inform or educate them. And so engagement is really, really important. And it's one of the reasons I'll just take you back to this UCP forum. What we want to do is to be able to engage people so that we can have an opportunity to inform them. So this is what we've been doing. We have over 1,000 volunteers working with us. We've got a very talented board with a couple of constitutional lawyers on our board, a former First Nations chief who is a successful businessman. One of our constitutional lawyers is First Nations as well. And it's been a very rewarding time at this particular time. Now, where do we need to get to? We need to get to a movement that is so large that it cannot be ignored by any government. Ralph Klein used to say, find a parade and get in front of it. So we're creating that parade, we're creating that movement. And why is this important this way? Because, folks, what we're doing has never been done before. And I think for the last 6 months, what we've accomplished is proof of concept. We have thousands and thousands of members now. And like I say, we're being followed. We have members from across Canada, believe it or not, which is really interesting. So growing the movement to 500,000 or 1 million people is critically important for all of you, because this will put everything into your control. And here's why that works. Some of you may have heard me mention the 3.5% rule before. This was coined by Erica Chenoweth, a Harvard professor. And she studied societal movements over a couple of 100 years, and she determined that just 3.5% of a population can change the direction of a society. So when Jason Kenney and the UCP were elected previously, they had 120,000 members, and gee, wouldn't you know, that's 3.5% of the voting electorate in Alberta. So if we grow this movement to 500,000 or 1 million people or more, you can see how we will be able to create this parade, this movement that no party can ignore if they want to be elected. And even if they are elected, they can't ignore us, because what we're advocating for as well, for our support, is that they adopt much of the policy and recommendations and bylaws that we are recommending. So holding elected officials accountable in a way in which they've never been held accountable before is critically important for all of you. Because what we don't want is a government elected saying they're going to do something during an election campaign and then bailing out when the going gets tough. And they know what the right thing is to do and they don't do it. So I would encourage you to consider not only acquiring a membership in the Alberta Prosperity Project, you might want to consider volunteering or forming a chapter yourself. We want to grow the number of chapters to about 300 by the end of this year. And we want to get to 500,000 to 1 million members prior to the next election. And while we know this will work is because we know that the independence parties want to get in front of this movement. We know that some of the UCP leadership candidates are interested in getting in front of this movement. And some of them have actually been to more than one of our events, which is interesting as well to see. So once again, we don't advocate for any particular party. It'll be up to you. We will have a grid ultimately on our website with on the vertical axis, there will be the various parties, and on the horizontal axis will be what they're willing to do to protect your interests, your individual freedoms, rights, and prosperity. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to end with this comment. Freedom is not free. We're not going to have prosperity ever without freedom. And if we don't stand up right now and fight this ideological war that we're facing with the global Marxists that are out there, we will lose. And we will be actually dishonoring our forefathers who fought in 2 world wars for our freedoms. So this is critically important for us. And I can't emphasize it enough how important it is for us to grow this movement collectively. And I'm humbled by all of you people here today. I thank you very much for your attention. And I'm excited to hear what Tanner has to say coming up, who's our economist. So thank you very much for your attention. And I'm happy to answer questions afterwards.
This is fun. Okay. All right. Just bear with me for 1 second. I don't know if that's better or worse. Okay. I don't really know how this is supposed to go. I don't have anywhere for this to go, Walter. It'll just have to be right here. How about now? Okay. Our next presenter is from Lloydminster, Alberta. He is a brilliant industrial organization economist and a published author. He is a speaker and commentator on political and ethical issues and has studied under some of Canada's foremost economists. He is the co-host of the Alberta Prosperity Project's weekly podcast, held on Thursday mornings. The last podcast had over 10,000 viewers. With his keen interest, wit, and bright mind, he offers so much perspective to the Alberta Prosperity Project, and he's here to demonstrate the many merits and benefits of a free and prosperous Alberta. He cares deeply about the state that Alberta finds herself in, and about how intrusively the governments meddle in our economy in order to facilitate our ruin. Here with an economic forecast for the independent nation of Alberta, our acting VP Economics and Youth Chapter co-leader, Mr. Tanner Hnidey.
I have this one. Yeah, good to go. Well, thank you all so much for coming today to join us and learn about the benefits and merits of independence, especially on this hot day. And I saw the car show coming in. I drive, in the summer especially, Grandpa's old 1970 International pickup. And I just love it. You hit a tree, you bend the tree. And There's no air conditioning, there's no radio, there's no power steering. It's as bone stock as it could be. And Dad said when his dad bought it, he wanted to put a paper bag over his head because it was international. But now, to me, it's just the cream of the crop. So, yes, thank you. Today, I want to talk to you about truck driving, about truckers. As I mentioned, my dad grew up on the farm, on the grain farm. My mom grew up on a dairy. And so I've always had a soft spot in my heart for trucks, for semis, for big machinery, for loud diesels and for Jake brakes and all of those things that I love to listen to, and the smell of diesel in the morning and the size and the solidarity of that truck driving alone on the highway, hauling grain in the early morning hours and all of those things. And so out of high school, although I immediately went to university, I acquired my Class 1 just in case I needed something as a backup. And indeed, actually, after university, because I graduated, right when COVID, or the lockdowns for COVID began to hammer us, I was able to use that Class 1 for a while I was volunteering with APP to haul grain, to pull some Super Bs for a bit. And I enjoyed it. It was fun. And I didn't enjoy hauling barley. I hated hauling barley because it's so itchy. That was no fun. But everything else I enjoyed. And you also know, and I know, that the health of a nation is accurately reflected or is accurately portrayed with the health of its trucking and transport industry, right? Our nation's health, as you know, was revived, and our spirits were rejuvenated when those brave and courageous truckers took to the streets and peacefully protested in Ottawa and did more for our rights and our freedoms than our government and our bureaucracy and all of those individuals that we have elected have ever done in the whole history of their existence. Thank you to the truckers. Now, you and I also know that if the nation stalls, if the transport stalls, the nation stalls. And if the trucks are stalled for very much longer, then the nation doesn't just stall, it actually begins to starve. And so you have at one end of the trucking industry, you have those hardworking and often underappreciated truckers. They're pulling lowboys, they're pulling Super Bs of grain, they're pulling cattle haulers, they're pulling flat decks, they're pulling reefers, they're pulling all of these trailers in order to deliver freight across not only the towns, not only the little hamlets, not only the bigger cities, not only the province, not only the country, but the entire continent. Day after day after day, they drive mile after mile, and they drive in the middle of summer when it's plus 40. They drive in the middle of winter when it's minus 40. They drive if the roads are good. They drive if the roads are icy. They're never hypnotized by the rhythm of white lines and the wide horizon that's ever before them. Their job is to keep the nation going, and indeed they do so. That's one end of the trucking industry. Now, on the other end of the trucking industry, like almost every other industry in the nation, you have the bureaucratic side of that industry. You have the bureaucratic end of the trucking industry, where those often increasingly radical, and I would argue increasingly ruthless, men and women work day and night, hardly working at all, in order to actually crush the trucking industry. We have complaints. We have issues as truck drivers. And so we take them to these officials, and they pass them off to another hearing. They pass them off to another committee. They pass them off to another official, stalling and stalling and stalling until the whole industry itself is actually seized. Why? They're doing so, as you know, in the name of climate change. Everything today is justified from government in the name of fighting climate change. If you're locked in your home to fight climate change. If it's cold outside and you're not allowed to use oil to heat your home, it's to fight climate change. No matter what they pass, they justify it using climate change. And because the science is so shoddy, and because the science itself is so politicized, it means the politician can honestly do whatever he wants, and he justifies it using climate change. And so at the nose of the semi, these bureaucrats begin to crush. And at the trailer of the semi, at the end of the semi, they begin to crush. And on the east side of the cab, they begin to crush. And on the west side of the cab, they begin to crush. They crush that whole semi, that whole vehicle with the truck driver inside, and therefore the industry with regulations and rules and red tape and emissions protocols and invasive standards and, as you know, and as I know, untenable laws that none of us can navigate. Now, you might say, what are you talking about? Or certainly those individuals who are not acquainted with the ins and outs of truck driving might say, what are you talking about? Let me tell you. In the first place, government has introduced and continues to introduce, even though they claim to be proponents of a market, they're introducing all of these, what's known as in economics, barriers to entry. And it means exactly that. It's a barrier to actually entering the market and working, making the market more competitive rather than less. Let me give you an example of that. In the first place, hopeful operators must take the plunge into the stratospheric cost of actually acquiring their Class 1. And I know this is a barrier to entry because if I, who acquired my Class 1 just a year before these new costs came into effect, if I was forced to acquire it now, I wouldn't. I couldn't because it's so expensive. $10,000 plus. New and expanded Class 1 training, which is also known as the Mandatory Entry Level Training, or MELT, was introduced for Class 1 certification and licensure in response to the tragedy of the Humboldt bus crash. And no one, of course, here, no one anywhere denies that indeed that bus crash was the most heartbreaking of tragedy that stilled both the clatter and the traffic of our lives and forced us to reflect on the blessings that each and every one of us are so privileged to enjoy. But now you have a licensing system. While perhaps it's not impossible, it's this close to being impossible, desperately out of reach, uncompetitively difficult for all of these drivers, these prospective drivers, these kids who want to work and provide for themselves and provide for their eventual family, pushed out of the industry because they're unable to obtain their Class 1. Here you have individuals raised on the farm. Rocky Mountain House is an excellent example of it. We were in Rimbey, we were in Wainwright, we've been all over these smaller towns, and they're all excellent examples of this. Here you are in these towns like Rocky Mountain House. Here we are with farmers and individuals in our midst who all your lives have operated classes of machinery and machines themselves more complicated and cumbersome than most individuals not only will operate in their lifetime, but will ever consider operating in their lifetime. And I know, as you know, because indeed I was in the industry, you already take your job so seriously, and you certainly take the safety of others so seriously. And yet, if here perhaps you want to haul a load of canola, let's say, to the crusher in, where's the crusher? Camrose or maybe Fort Saskatchewan, right? You have to navigate at least 100 hours of truck driver training and pay literally upwards of $10,000 in order to acquire a license to legally drive, even if you've been operating such machines for literally a decade as a kid or an individual on the farm. Now, of course, when I make mention of this, such statement is not met without resistance. It's an unpopular statement to make. You see, I might say that this program, this new program, is a cash cow. I might say that it's inefficient, but in response, I will hear that, well, you just want to make the roads more dangerous. You don't care about the safety of others. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth, because individuals can make those claims. They can say, well, you don't care about the safety of others. You don't care about this and that. You want people to get hurt. And in reply, we can say, fine, show me the data. You make all of these claims, government, you make all of these claims when you introduce new rules and new regulations that increase your size and your scope and your power over us, and yet you never provide any proof, any justification for those laws, for those rules, and for those new procedures for licensing. So the $10,000 training was introduced in early 2019, the early months of 2019. But in fact, there were more fatal injuries involving truck tractors, involving semis, in 2019, which is the latest data available, than there were in Alberta in 2018, 2016, and 2015. And there were more injuries and accidents, or injuries in accidents, excuse me, in Alberta involving truck tractors in 2019 than there were, for example, in 2016. However, This is where you must be careful, because it's easy to look at the data and say, well, the data hasn't changed, or it's changing very minimally, and so it's safe to assume that this program, this licensure program, isn't working. Now, I would go a step farther than that. I would say it's not inappropriate to possibly or actually assume that the data is borderline impossible to obtain. Here's what I mean. I mean that insofar of, think of all of the overwhelming number of factors, all of the contributing factors that actually contribute to accidents in Alberta in any given year. Suppose you had 2 more fatalities this year than last involving semis in Alberta in an accident. Think of all of the things you have to take into account to see why that was. You see, it might be that you have 2 more fatalities this year, but perhaps we get an extra month of snow. Perhaps one day Highway 2 is so icy, it's a miracle that there are only 2 more fatalities, as tragic as that is. Perhaps one day there's a dust storm. Perhaps one day there's a tornado that picks up a semi and throws it across the entire highway. Perhaps one day there's an impaired driver who pulls out and a truck driver has to swerve into the ditch to try and avoid catastrophe. Perhaps there are all of these factors that are not taken into account when you look at the data. And so I know that an argument from silence isn't an argument, but it's an argument from silence on the other side as well. Government says we have to impose these rules to make driving safer, to which we reply, where's the evidence? Where's the data? Can you extrapolate from all of these accidents, from all of these numbers and these regressions that you guys run? Extrapolate the data and show me and you specifically that your rules and your regulations are working. Now, do not misunderstand us, of course. To clarify for everyone here and for our friends in the media, we are not saying at APP that the province should abolish driver training, not at all. That's not what we're arguing for. We're simply saying that our current system, this one-size-fits-all system, this postmodern system where everybody is treated exactly the same. You can actually almost call it a Soviet system because everyone's treated exactly the same in the 1970s Soviet Union. This system is inefficient. It creates unnecessary barriers to entry into the market, and it often harms the prospective driver and the nation more than it helps. But of course, this is not the only barrier to entry that I can think of. We never or rarely talk about vaccines on this stage. That is not the business of APP, and whether a man wants to be vaccinated or not, that's his own business. He has the freedom to choose, and he should. He should have the freedom to choose. But in the trucking industry at present, if you do not have a vaccine passport, still, you cannot enter America. And you never hear about it on the media. Here you have all of these truck drivers who know what they're doing and have done it for a very long time, who have hauled from up north, down south, into Arizona, into Texas, perhaps into California. Who knows where they go? They go all across the states, and then they come back up to Canada to get more product, and back they go away from their families, providing for as many people as possible. And yet at present, they're unable to do so because they do not possess an Orwellian passport. That is a barrier to entry, but it's more than that. It's a barrier to entering a country. And no one talks about it. No one on the news talks about it. It's hush, and it's wrong. Now, along with barriers to entry, there are other ways that the bureaucrat is crushing the industry at present. Our trucking industry, and you as well, I know, because I'm experiencing the same thing. Our trucking industry is being crushed by carbon taxes and by excess taxation. Suppose a driver travels 200,000 kilometers in a year. A truck driver travels 200,000 kilometers in a year. And suppose, for ease of arithmetic, that he's loaded for all of those miles. He's heavy. He's pulling a Super B, and he's 63,000, whatever it is, kilograms. Just for the ease of math. If he travels 200,000 kilometers in a year, and if he's loaded for almost all of those kilometers, let's say that on average, his fuel consumption, his diesel consumption is 2 kilometers per liter, or somewhere in that range. 2 kilometers is easy. That means the truck driver has to fill up with 100,000 liters of fuel every year. That's his annual diesel consumption. Now, there is a tax on that diesel. There are federal taxes. Although currently suspended, there are provincial taxes. There is GST, there's a tax on tax, and of course there is a carbon tax. Now at present, the carbon tax is 11 cents per liter. So when you perform the equations, you see that the truck driver, the owner-operator, the business owner, has to pay per truck an extra $11,000 just in carbon taxes every year. And that's just this year. If you fast forward to 2030, and if we've done nothing, and if we're still in the situation that we're in, then the carbon tax will be 40 cents per liter, which is $40,000 per year in extra cost, which of course in 2030 dollars, if we're going by today's inflation, might be only worth $11,000. But anyways. And so the driver has to pay all of this money to carbon tax. But you would be mistaken if you said it was only $11,000. I told you it was, and that's true from an accounting perspective. But there's an economic perspective you must take into account as well. Suppose that in a better world, you didn't have to pay the carbon tax. And so you were able to save that $11,000 this year. Think of all that you could have done with that $11,000, or that you could do with that $11,000. Well, you could put it towards your daughter's education. You could pay off her schooling earlier. You could put it towards retirement. You could invest it today, and you could earn a return on that investment, and in 25 or 30 years, retire a year or 2 or 3 early because of the capital that you had acquired. Perhaps you could put it towards a renovation. Perhaps you could put it towards a vacation. Perhaps you could do all of these things that instead you can't because it has to go to government in order to fight climate change. Of course, we haven't seen the effects of this fight yet, but nonetheless. And so everyone, to put it simply, is all the poorer because of these restrictions. Now, these are only 2 examples, barriers to entry and excess taxation, that the government is crushing our trucking industry. And there are many more. I haven't even touched, for example, insurance. But time fails us, and so we have to proceed to the solution. If government is killing the private trucking industry, you must realize it is not dying a natural death. It's one thing for something like the horse and the carriage to die a natural death in preparation to make way for something new, like the automobile. But it's another thing entirely for it to die an unnatural death. For the private trucking industry, it's not dying a natural death. Instead, it's being suffocated by assailants in Ottawa, as you and I both know. And I, as well, like you, have tried to remedy this situation in Canada. I have looked to Confederation to make things work in Confederation. I have heard the arguments. I have listened to all of the promises of the politician that are so grand and so marvelous, and yet they never come true. I have watched men, and I have watched women, like you have, walk into the legislature. Their heads are high, and their shoulders are back, and their suits are neatly pressed, and they walk in with snarling like a lion or snarling like a bulldog, ready to take on the federal government, only for them to, just a little while later, leave like whimpering puppies because they have been outmaneuvered by the federal government. And as Dr. Modry has already mentioned, all of that leverage that they presently possess over us. I have presented these problems to you for your consideration and your warning. My youth was passed in this province under the direction of Klein. I don't quite remember it, but I know that it was a period of prosperity. But now I am, like you, clutching on a precipice and sliding into a dark and fearful abyss where government is omnipresent, government is omniscient, government is omnicompetent, but everybody else is left alone. So I therefore conclude, after hearing the arguments already presented to us today, that independence is the vehicle to guarantee Alberta's prosperity. We have tried everything else, and you know it, and I know it. We have negotiated, we've tried to negotiate in the best of faith with the Eastern Bloc. Independence now is our only option. First, it's our only option because we need to remove all of these unwanted barriers to entry, not only in the trucking markets and not only in the trucking industry, but all industries across the province. The Alberta government, when independent, I would argue right now for that matter, must seriously reduce its size and its scope, and that includes their power regarding licensure. restrictions, and rules. You know and I know that government unchecked will only continue to expand, and they'll hammer us. They'll hammer the business owner. They'll hammer the trucker with heavier and heavier and heavier restriction until no one has any choice but to serve and work for, in order to receive their daily bread, government. Already we're suffering from a serious shortage of truckers in the province. In fact, it's so serious, at the present rate, if we do nothing, we'll be short 3,600 truck drivers by next year. You never hear that on the news. We're so short of truck drivers, of course, the province, instead of doing what I would argue is the logical thing and removing those barriers to entry, instead they've authorized a 3-year, $30 million program aimed at recruiting 600 new commercial drivers. But what we're proposing is something new. We're proposing something different, and in the eyes of government, we're proposing something, I think, that's unthinkable. We want Alberta to adopt merit-based qualifications, not only for the trucking industry, but for all industry. These barriers, these unnecessary barriers to entry that do not exist naturally, have to be removed. If an individual can drive, then he should not be forced to empty his life savings in order to pay for his Class 1. And the same is true of a vaccine passport. It's when independent, and only when independent, that you'll be able to take that vaccine passport and write in the Constitution that it has to be entirely ripped up and shredded and never, ever, ever again introduced in the province. And you know the same is true of carbon taxes, of course. We need independence to totally defeat and destroy that carbon tax and other invasive taxes, and pass legislation, as I mentioned, that ensures such taxes will never, ever, ever be enacted in the province of Alberta again. Because you know the Supreme Court has already ruled in Canada that the carbon tax is unconstitutional. In an independent Alberta, instead, it would be ruled that Alberta itself, in fact, and the carbon tax in Alberta is entirely unconstitutional, saving not only truck drivers, saving not only business owners, saving not only you as a consumer, thousands of dollars every year. This movement grows, and it continues to grow. Federal domination, or their attempted domination of our nation, of Alberta, is at an end as we grow tired of their trying to submerge us in a way of life that we cannot and will not and do not accept. And when we are successful, when we have that referendum on independence, and when we enjoy independence itself, then our truckers shall be protected from economic desolation, and then our children shall be shielded from the poverty of socialism, and then our province, a public beacon of resolute defiance against the destruction of our industry, shall stand in the world as a nation that upholds its economy, is grateful for its workers, and enables our truckers and transport crews to work and provide for their families as all good men and women desire to do. Thank you. Good.
Canada Day, everybody. Just a reminder that anything H2O has donated the water, and we need to stay hydrated. It's gone. Our next guest, and also the index cards. You must have some questions. Just put your hand up and someone will bring you a card. Write your question down in your best penmanship, because that's how I like them, and then we'll get those answered for you. All right. Our next guest is a well-known, courageous defender of rights and freedoms.
In the blue.
I've heard him speak on many occasions, and I can honestly say that the energy he brings when he gets onto this stage and this mic will spark a passion in you that will have you wanting to be something that is history making.
Any response? Any reaction?
He has put on thousands of miles, not just in Alberta, but elsewhere as well. He is a household name, and his popularity grows. He knows there are people who are still fighting for their lives, their livelihoods, their futures, and
Pam's
so
like,
much more.
see the couple
He
in reach? And I'm like, oh,
advocates
yeah,
for
this one? She's
that.
like, yeah, yeah. I'm like,
He
oh,
inspires
because I was
others
sitting,
to
she
want
was
to do that
standing.
as well.
It's the same angle.
He advocates for truth. He advocates for kindness. He advocates for understanding for those who have a different perspective. And I can tell you firsthand that his burgers are
I'm not a
second
good writer,
to
but
none.
this is what I wrote.
Ladies and gentlemen, from the Whistle Stop Cafe here in Alberta, Mr. Chris Todd.
Do I have to start again? Good, because I don't remember what I said. So the government is everywhere. Is there supposed to be a buzzing coming out of there? Oh, well. So if the government is everywhere, have you ever heard somebody say something to the effect of, oh, I don't want to get involved in politics? I've said that a lot in the past. I really don't want anything to do with it. But the unfortunate fact is, every single aspect of our lives, from the moment we're born, actually from before we're born, every aspect of our entire existence is affected by government. Everything. We have to have a birth certificate. We have to have a social insurance number. We have to have a driver's license. We have to have a death certificate, a marriage certificate, some of which certain classes of people weren't allowed to have or have been given by accident. For instance, the guy that had to prove, I met him a few months ago, he had to prove that he wasn't dead because he got issued a death certificate. So he went to the registries, he said, well, I got their certificate, but I'm not dead. And you know what they said to him? Well, the government requires proof. Can you believe that? He had to go get a doctor's note to prove that he wasn't dead. Which makes me wonder if some of these folks making these rules and laws should be getting a note proving they're not brain dead. So politics affects and influences every aspect of our life. There's literally like nothing we can do that the government doesn't watch over us or interfere, or at the very worst, actually just tell us we can't do it, even though it's all right. So I am 100% guilty of being I don't want to get involved in politics kind of guy. I had a really great career in the oil patch. And as a matter of fact, I get to go do some rig work next week, which is going to be fun. And I was kind of in a position where I was comfortable. I never went hungry, as you can tell. I drove new vehicles all the time. I could buy what I wanted. I could go on vacation, and things were great. So that comfort put me in a place where I just didn't really care that the government was being dirty, sneaky bastards. Pardon my French. I knew that things were going on that weren't right. I knew that there was this push towards an ideology that says human beings are evil and they need to be removed from the planet. We've seen it coming for, 20, 30 years, right? My entire adult life, my entire voting life, I've heard things from some of these groups that lobby the government that basically say human beings are bad and we should be gone. Everything's our fault. So we've known this forever, and we didn't get involved. How many people in this room only just started getting involved and paying attention really to what's going on and wanted to make a difference? Don't be shy. I'm one of those people as well. So I'm going to ask you, now this is going to be difficult because there's lots of people. I'll ask you a question, and if somebody has something to say, just shout it out. Why did you get involved now? You have the time. We're fed up. Your kids, your grandchildren. COVID. How many people in this room are still living a fairly comfortable life and are secure and really don't have to worry about much? There's a few of you. Why are you here? I would suggest, because you care about Alberta, you care about other people. That's your grandkids. That's what this is about. This is about people. It's not about politics. It's actually not about COVID. It's not about the global elite. This is about people. Getting back to a place where, regardless if something is affecting them or not, they're actually getting out there and getting involved because they see what's happening around them. They see their neighbor losing their business because the government says, you can't serve your customers anymore because COVID. They see that maybe their neighbors with trucking companies no longer able to make their payments because costs have risen so drastically, labor is in such short supply, they just can't provide the services and earn the revenue anymore. And this is extremely encouraging because most of the time what we see is people getting involved because something has affected them personally. I'm one of those people. I got involved because I was affected personally. And my involvement was in the very beginning for like the first 3 days was I'm not going to listen to the government because they're going to destroy my business, my family, I'll lose my home, I'll lose my investment, I'll lose everything I work for because the government is doing something they're not allowed to do. That's why I stood up. Within a few days, people were coming to my restaurant from all over the country and sharing their stories. So this very, very quickly changed from a me thing to a, wow, this is a people thing. Very quick. And in doing so, it actually made me feel quite ashamed that these things had been happening for years and I hadn't got involved because I was too comfortable in my own life. But that's kind of human nature. We have tunnel vision. We worry about our own bubble and our own family first, right? That's how we are. It's nothing to be ashamed of. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think everybody in this room should be encouraged that there are those who actually aren't affected by this that are getting involved now. There are some people in this province with more money than I could even count. I think they probably weigh their money. You know, they lose $1 million and they don't. It's like me losing my change in the couch cushions. And they're sticking their necks out. They're standing up and they're writing some checks and they're saying, we got to stop this. Because they also see what's going on around them. They see other people being affected and they want to stop it. And maybe some of them have children or grandchildren and they don't want them to own nothing and be happy and be their adult lives be barbecuing cricket burgers in the backyard. But people are getting involved. And I did say this right from the beginning. This is not about the government. This is not about politics. This is about people doing what we're supposed to do, which is stick together, stand with each other. We're stronger together. We're supposed to be, human beings are a very community-minded animal. Most of us. I mean, some people just don't like people, and some animals don't like people either, but for the most part, we're kind of like a herd animal, are we not? We like to be around other people. It's fun to open up your backyard to your neighbors and bring them over and barbecue and have a couple beers and share your stories. Those community-minded things are kind of what makes us different. And so now, through all of this, through the business closures and the vax passports and the job losses because people didn't want to take the jab, we see communities rebuilding. And sometimes it's a little bit slow, yes, I'll give you that. We're still slaves to our human nature, which is we want to, go out and do things and have fun and not really worry about stuff when it's great. Make hay when the sun shines, and the sun's been shining a lot in Alberta over the last few months. So, we're golfing and some people are, I'm not, golfing and camping and vacationing and going to the lake and things like that and enjoying the summer that we didn't have for 2 years. But there's still people filling rooms like this everywhere I go, all across the province. They're not as full as they used to be because of golf. But this is encouraging. It's encouraging that people are actually taking the time to do this. It's encouraging that you're here. And is there anybody in this room who is still questioning whether or not we actually have a problem that we have to fight? So we're all on the same page that we have some serious problems within society, within our government, all across the world, and we need to do something about it, correct? So you don't need to be convinced of that. You don't need to be convinced that we have to get out from underneath the tyranny of the federal government. I mean, it's blatantly obvious. And when you come to one of these Alberta Prosperity Project events, it really motivates you to do something. But what is the something? I think everybody in this room probably is here because they're looking for a solution. Now, I haven't said this before, but I know what the solution is. I know where the solution lies. It came to me this morning as I was brushing my teeth. Do you know what the solution is? My phone is listening, figuratively. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up and you shake off your morning fog and you go to the bathroom and you brush your teeth and you're looking in the mirror, you're going to find the solution. It's staring at you with a frothy, toothpastey mouth. You are the solution. You've always been the solution. None of the politicians are the solution. They're slaves. Oh, what do you mean they're slaves? They're slaves to the polls. They're going to do what they think they have to do to get reelected. If you don't believe me, just listen to some of the things they're saying. You're the solution. Your voices are the most powerful thing in this province. Your individual interactions with your friends and your neighbors are more effective and more powerful than any of us standing up on this stage and speaking to you. The relationships that you have with those around you and the trust you build with them, that gives you an opportunity to reach people on a level that we just can't up here. I mean, we can give you information and ideas and things like that, but at the end of the day, the solution is with each one of you bringing this message to your friends and your family. And it's not a message of anger or hate or anything like that. It's a message of hope and compassion that we see something's wrong. These people are being harmed. People are being killed. They are actually dying. What's the leading cause of death last year in Alberta? Unknown. Now, you cannot tell me that for 2.5 years, every single death that happened, they knew why that person died, did they not? We heard about it every day. It was all over the news. It was crammed at us from every angle. Radio, social media, television, everything. They told you they knew what the problem was and how to fix it. And all of a sudden this year, they're telling you, oh, well, this is unexplained. We have no idea. But don't worry. Well, I'm worried. I'm very worried that we have people like that in charge of policy and making laws and regulations and things like that in our province. And it's time to put an end to it. So we know what the problem is. We know what the solution is. So where do we take that? What do we do with that? Any ideas? I'll give you some of my ideas. One great idea is bring people with you to these events. Bring a couple friends. Tell them there's snacks, because I guarantee you, if they're anything like me, they will come. It doesn't matter what the meeting's about, they'll be here for the snacks. But they're going to learn something. Another way to do it is, if we know that some of these seats are empty because people are out at the lake or they're golfing or they're fishing or whatever, go with them. Invite them over. Pardon? Or, well, they're working, yes, that too. Do things in groups in your own communities. Build those relationships back that we've lost in the last 2.5 years, especially, and get this message out everywhere you go. That's what's going to make a difference. That's what's going to turn the tide. I mean, it's already happening. We're hearing some politicians and some influencers and some leaders. They're using some of the verbiage that we use on this stage. They're saying some of the same things that we are, suggesting, hinting towards Alberta needs to get independent and out of the tyranny of the federal government. They're not coming out right and saying it. But do you know why they're speaking the way they are? Because the parade is growing and they're trying to get in front of it. Now, granted, they are trying to steer the parade in a different direction because we still haven't grown to the number we need to give them the courage they need to actually stand up and say something. Do you know what's going to happen when the Alberta Prosperity Project reaches, a threshold of, say, 20,000 members, 25,000 members? You know what's going to happen? All of a sudden, some of these MLAs, some of these politicians, some of these people that failed us over the last 2.5 years, all of a sudden, am I allowed to say balls? Are going to grow 5 sizes. They're going to get some courage. And the concerns they had that they didn't raise before for fear of getting kicked out of caucus or fear of losing their jobs or looking like a conspiracy theorist, they're going to speak up. Now, in my experience, when one person stands up and speaks the truth and does the right thing, other people follow. Okay, I didn't know that was a clapping thing. So when we build this, and I say when, not if, because we will, when we build this to that threshold that gives these men and women some confidence and some courage and some cojones, one of them is going to stand up and speak out, and they're going to say, you know what? We heard from Dr. Modry and Dr. Hogginson and Dr. Alexander and Dr. McCullough like months and months and months ago. They sounded the alarm, and we were too scared to say anything, but we're going to say something now. And then it's going to be like dominoes, because the truth will always come out. I mean, we're seeing the truth come out. Unfortunately, we're seeing it in statistics right now, because hindsight is 20/20, right? But that's kind of what's happening here. And every time I go on social media or even take a phone call from somebody of influence, I hear more and more truth coming out. It's not going to be hidden for very long. But when this all, I shouldn't say blow up, but I'm going to. When this all blows up, we're gonna have some choices to make. Are we going to crucify and condemn those who were scared to stand up for us? Or are we going to be compassionate and understanding that they're human beings, they're fallible, they're not perfect, and accept their apologies? We have a choice to make, and it's a very difficult one, especially if you've been affected to the point where you've lost a loved one over this. It's going to be tough. And the reason I bring that up is because when we talk about solutions don't always turn out the way we imagine they will. Everything happens for a reason, and it happens the way it's supposed to. But how many times in our lives have we thought, you know what, this really isn't what we expected? Why did it happen this way? But it's for a reason. Anyway, the solution lies with each and every one of you in this room. It doesn't lie with me. It doesn't lie with Dr. Modry or anyone else. It's always been about the people. Everything that's happened over the last 2 years was done to the people, and the solution has always been with them. The one thing that's kept us from rising up and fixing these things before it got to the point it is right now, it was fear, right? I was scared in the beginning. I'm sure most of you were. Maybe some people are still a little bit fearful, and I don't blame you. When you get this stuff shoved down your throat every single day, and you're told to be fearful, you're told to be fearful of your neighbors, you're told to be fearful of a certain class of society who chose differently with their bodies than you. When you're told to be fearful enough, it becomes the truth, and you fear. But we got to rise up against that, or we got to rise up away from that, especially the fear of looking like an outsider because we want to say the truth. That's a big fear people have right now. I mean, you put the truth on Facebook and immediately the fact checkers are right on you, telling you that you're a bad person and a conspiracy theorist, and you're harming the world because, you know, you don't say what they want you to say. And when it comes back to politics, we have to shed that fear that's been instilled on us by these politicians that tells us if we don't support them or do what they say, set our principles and our ethics and morals aside and follow them, that something bad will happen. We got to see right through that. And that's the entire point of the Alberta Prosperity Project. Something outside of the political world that gives you folks, that gives everybody the courage and the information and the resources they need to not only see through what the politicians are telling us, but to make informed decisions based on principle and morals. That's what this is about. And that's why this is different than anything that's ever been done before. It's always been about supporting a party or a candidate, right? Because of their platform. And how many times have we gone to the ballot box thinking, I really don't want to vote for this guy, but you know, he said this one thing I like. I'm not satisfied with that anymore. I want to create a parade outside of politics so that those people whose names are on that ballot do what we want them to do. That's how we change them. And it's working. It really is. But we need to build this bigger. If it's working at 80, where are we at, Dennis, for memberships? If it's working with over 8,000, 8,200 members, imagine what's going to happen when we build this to 25 or 50 or 100,000 or 135. Now, no pressure or anything, but this is kind of like, I hope you feel the weight of this on your shoulders, because this isn't just a me or an APP thing. This is all about all of us. And the work that we do and the time we put in over the next few months before May of next year is going to be the deciding factor on the path this province takes. It's going to be the deciding factor on what those who want to be our lawmakers put on the table for us to vote for. So no pressure or anything. Anyway, it's not all doom and gloom, because part of this, like I said before, is doing fun things with your neighbors. Have some barbecues, invite them over for dinner, take your elderly neighbors fishing or something like that, and have individual conversations with them and get them at least thinking about this. Because the more people we have spreading this message, the faster this grows and the better chance we have at making sure that that little girl and that really awesome dude in the Batman t-shirt aren't eating crickets when they're my age, even though I'm not that much older. Am I out of time? Okay. Shameless plug here. If you're looking for something fun to do tomorrow with like-minded individuals, I think there's something going on in Mirror, Alberta. Does anybody know what it is? Yes, we're having our first bull riding event at the Whistle Stop Cafe in Mirror, Alberta, and we're doing it tomorrow. And it's going to be absolutely awesome. So if you can make it out, please do so. We have a pancake breakfast, we have cowboy church, we have bull riding, we got some live music, which may or may not include Tamara Leach's band. I don't know. And I might be playing with her, so that's great. And, we're just going to have a great day establishing relationships with like-minded or maybe not individuals. Thank you very much.
Chris Scott from the Whistle Stop, everybody.
I can't stay. I got to get back to the restaurant.
So you have to take that thing off and give it to one of those guys.
Is there a question for me specifically?
So Chris isn't going to stay for Q&A. Let's give him a round of applause. Apparently, when you own a restaurant, you have to cook there sometimes. All right, so just while I'm moving some things around up here, I just would like to let you know of some events that are coming up. As Chris said, there is Bibles and Bulls tomorrow at Mirror, Alberta. Next Thursday, there is a pierogi dinner. We only need two. Go ahead. Well, there's a pierogi dinner at Mundare put on by the Bakerville and Mundare chapter. Also, next Thursday, there is a barn dance and barbecue put on by the Innisfail chapter, and that is at Maple Dell Acres. August 20th, we'll be back at the Whistle Stop again at Mirror, Alberta, with more details to come on that one. And then there's the forum that we hope to get some much needed answers from any of the leader hopefuls, and that's on the 25th. And the last day for tickets for the forum is the 18th. You talked about that already, right?
Yeah.
Forum? Okay.
Yeah, before we start, I want to make a couple of comments.
Okay, so also if you have any questions or you want more information about any of the upcoming events, they're all listed on our website. I do know there's some coming up in Calgary as well, or near Calgary, because the chapter leaders there are really working hard at getting into that city. We also have contact at Alberta Prosperity Project or at albertaprosperity.com if you have a question that you'd like to send that way. And we also have a toll-free number. I'd like to also thank the countless and dedicated volunteers that have helped to put this event on here today. If we can give them a round of applause, that would be great. And one last request from Daryl Park, the chapter leader from Rocky Mountain House. If there are any business owners here who are interested in getting together with other business owners with the single goal of bringing awareness of the Alberta Prosperity Project to Rocky Mountain House, with the goal to be working together on local issues to create an Alberta Prosperity Project movement that is so strong that nothing will stop you in this city.
So before we get going on the Q&A, I just wanted to tell you that, you know, the prizes for independence within Canada, or independence, even better, untethered to Canada, are spectacular. And I want to give you 2 economic examples. Number 1, how many people here are receiving a pension? How many of you would like an additional $3 billion added to that pension? Right. Well, do you know that we overfund the pension plan by $3 billion a year? So successful negotiations or Alberta becoming an independent nation, you have those $3 billion added to your pension plan. How many people here are working and paying income tax? Raise your hand. All right. So how would you like an 8 to 10% flat tax rate? Would you like that? Well, did you know that we are federally taxed to the tune of $55 to $60 billion every year, of which we get back 27? So imagine what we can do with the additional $33 billion in this province as an independent nation. It's spectacular. How many people here own their property without a mortgage? Now, if you think you own your property, just don't pay your property tax and you'll find out who owns it. Point is we don't have property rights, but it may be possible for the first time with the massive wealth that this province generates, that property taxes could be either dramatically reduced or eliminated altogether. I want you to think about that. Those prizes will translate to a dramatic improvement in your quality of life and your standard of living. Let's get to the questions.
We've seen our Prime Minister state Canadians do not have the right to self-defense with firearms. Where does the Alberta Prosperity Project stand in terms of gun ownership?
Well, if you look at the policy and governance document on our website, you will see that there are 3 statements related to gun ownership, but fundamentally it's this, is that we believe that Albertans have the right to defend themselves and their families and their businesses by whatever means is possible. And so the concept of legal gun ownership is entrenched in our policy and governance document. And when you think about it realistically, laws targeting gun ownership should only be targeted at illegal gun ownership, not at legal gun ownership. And that's the policy of the Prosperity Project. And by the way, there's 367,000 gun owners in the province of Alberta, and we want them all to become members of the Alberta Prosperity Project.
Can Tanner speak to the financial benefits to the people of Alberta if Alberta is independent, such as income tax and property tax?
Oh, well, I guess I just did.
No, but that's,
Oh, he has his.
does this mic work? Oh, yeah, you're gonna be close to it.
You probably have.
Honestly, it's exactly what Dr. Modry has already mentioned. There are numerous benefits to.
No.
Is the mic just?
Yeah, just use it.
That's fine. It's easy to trigger. There are numerous. That's way better. Numerous benefits financially, economically to independence. As an economist, I should clarify, there are accounting benefits, but accounting is different than economics. Economics is more focused on scarcity, whereas accounting is more focused on numbers, and there are benefits to the numbers. Of course, Dr. Modry's mentioned the CPP, the income tax reduction. We have a $130 billion debt just in Alberta. That has to be paid down, right? It has to be removed. You have to cut spending, and it will take a tough government to do it. But if you create this movement, this parade, then they'll be forced to, lest they be elected out of office. But economically, there are benefits as well. Like I mentioned, the removal of these barriers to entry, increased free trade. For example, at present in Canada, as you know, we have Bill C-69 that harms us. And no matter what a current politician says in Alberta, they might say they're going to snarl at Ottawa. They might say they don't want to enforce it. They have to. It's federal law, and it's been proven to be constitutional. So when independent, of course, then you can remove it because we're no longer under the Constitution of Canada. So there are benefits like that as well, but for the actual numbers, if you want to discuss after, certainly. Even think of inflation. Think of how inflated the housing price is at present, even though it's coming down. At the height of it, in January of this year, you had the average house price in Canada was $824,000. Unbelievable. And that's a consequence of printing all of this money. And so the asset prices increased because money isn't worth so much, or not as much as it was. But when independent, if you had a hard currency, if you had a proper currency that politicians were not able to manipulate at their pleasure and at their will, then you would see those prices return to normal, proper, rational, manageable levels. So there are numerous benefits to independence.
Yeah, I want to add one more major benefit that a lot of people don't really recognize, and that is this. Let's look at when private industry provides a product or a service and you, the consumer, purchase it for $1. When the federal government provides that service, that same product or service, you are paying $3 for it. That is how inefficient the federal government is with our money. So take the issue of policing, for example. Deloitte did a study, and it indicated that it would cost us $180 million to replace the RCMP with the provincial police force. And as you know, Quebec and Ontario each have their own provincial police forces. They don't have the RCMP. The truth of the matter is what Deloitte didn't take into account is that 3-to-1 inefficiency in financing. In fact, it's more likely that having our own provincial police force would not only provide more policing, particularly for the rural communities, but it would be at the same or less cost than what we are currently paying for a Crown Corporation controlled police force. And what we want is an Alberta controlled police force.
If a party says it will agree to do many of the things the Alberta Prosperity Project proposes, what will stop that party from changing their minds once elected?
That's a great question, and there are two answers to it. For one thing, for them to get in front of our movement, i.e. for us to support them, this is what has to happen. They have to be agreeable to the bylaw proposals that we are proposing, meaning that they would be held to immediate account and recall if they don't do what they've agreed to do. That's number one. Number two, we have two constitutional lawyers on our board, and a few months ago we had an idea that I discussed. I had an idea and I discussed it with them. Could we hold could we sign a contract in the way in which the Alberta Prosperity Project holds them legally accountable? And both of those two lawyers indicated that they thought that that might be possible. So that's another consideration. Now it's May of 2023 is when that next election. There's a lot that's going to happen between now and then. But where we will have this control to be able to compel those kinds of contractual relationships is when we have a movement that is so big it cannot be ignored, and it cannot be ignored by the parties, because if they don't have our support, they can't be elected. It's really that simple.
Can you explain what independent republic means?
Yeah, a constitutional republic basically means that the country functions under the rule of law and an absolutely perfect constitution. Now, probably no constitution is perfect. To put it in sharp focus, for example, take Commonwealth nations. There are 54 Commonwealth countries. They are constitutional democracies. They're not constitutional republics. So of the 54 countries that are members of the Commonwealth, 34 of them are constitutional republics, meaning that they have no relationship to the monarchy whatsoever. Their duty is to their constitution and to their law. And so there's no relationship with the, like I say, with the monarchy. So constitutional, and by the way, it brings up a really important point about democracy. You might remember when Churchill stated, democracy is the worst form of government except for everything else. And the reason why democracy fails is because left unchecked, you wind up with the tyranny of the majority over the minority. And that is why Quebec and Ontario control us here in Western Canada. It's the tyranny of the majority over the minority. And this is what happened with respect to the COVID-19 mandates as well. It was the tyranny of the majority over the minority. How do you fix this? You constitutionally protect individual freedoms and rights. So constitutional republics they are based on a solid constitution and the rule of law.
Can Danielle Smith and other politicians who are claiming to make change in the province, for example, the police department, Alberta pension, and etc., can they make the claims to make these changes without first securing our independence through referendum, or are they just saying these things to get votes? Can they do any of these things without the leverage of independence?
Yes. What we've determined as well through the research that we've done with respect to the Alberta Prosperity Project and evaluating the Constitution, I probably read it twice now, it's extremely boring. But we've also run these questions by 4 constitutional lawyers, 2 from the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom, John Carpe, who's the president, and James Kitchen, and then our own 2 constitutional lawyers on our board. So this is what you can do legally. It doesn't create any problem at all. You just have to set in motion informing the federal government that from henceforth, at such and such a time, we're giving you notice that we are going to take control of policing, pensions, immigration, employment insurance, and provincial tax collection. And the beauty of taking control of provincial tax collection is it sets the stage later on for taking control of federal tax collection. Now, that sort of sets the stage for what's important. And it's easy to do that because those things can be done within an 18 to 24 month time frame. But what's important that you cannot get without a successful referendum on independence is, for example, what we talked about already, ending equalization. Number 2, taking control of federal taxation. Number 3, getting out from under egregious federal government overreach, such as Bill C-69, Bill C-48, avoiding Bill C-21, for example, the Censorship Act, and Bill 11, the Gun Confiscation Act, which is coming. To stop these kinds of things and to negotiate an end to the Canada Health Act, these things are impossible. That you cannot just refuse to, for example, not follow those dictates, because like I said, the federal government will withhold transfer payments and they're still collecting federal taxation. So this is where it's for those things that you need a successful referendum on independence, because you can appreciate that it's those things that are really important for you. But the other things, policing, pensions, immigration, employment insurance, and provincial tax collection, that's all legal. That's easy and straightforward to do. And just, there's going to be a lot of people out there that will say things that are really fear-mongering, that are going to try and dissuade you from supporting taking control of those 5 things which can be done legally. But it's quite important to understand why. For example, taking control of policing. If you're going to have a referendum on independence at some point, you want to be sure that your police force is responsible to Alberta citizens and to the provincial government, not a crown corporation that's controlled by the federal government, which is indirectly controlled by the WEF and the UN.
When Alberta gets our independence, will we be immune to the World Economic Forum?
That's a great question. Yeah, we've talked about this. Alberta is not the only region that's standing up or starting to stand up against this socialist Marxist program of the WEF UN Agenda 2030. Other regions in the world, you're seeing right now the Netherlands with the farmers, what they're doing. You're also seeing, for example, what's happening in Florida and in Texas and in Montana and in South Dakota. And then there are 3 oil-rich areas, I think Illinois, Ohio, and one other, that just came out, I think yesterday or maybe this morning. Jeff Rath called me and told me that they've passed legislation to the effect that they are not going to enforce any regulatory federal changes that are going to compromise their hydrocarbon, their fossil fuel industry as well. So there are areas in the world that are really rising up, against this WEF UN agenda. With respect to Alberta as well, I want you to know that we have had negotiations. They've already occurred with people at an extremely high level in the U.S. Former administration. And you'll know their names, but I'm not at liberty to talk about it. And we're going to be meeting at a later date following the subsequent midterm elections. So there's going to be a tremendous ability for Alberta to be really one of the tips of the spears that burst this socialist Marxist bubble that's enveloping society. And we can be truly a beacon of the world on how to achieve this, because other regions want to do it as well. And I think you're going to find that when we have created the movement to such a level that it has true international attention and massive Canadian federal attacks coming at us because of this, you can be absolutely sure that we're winning and we will have international support. And as an independent nation, yeah, we can absolutely resist what's happening with the UN WEF agenda. Otherwise, ladies and gentlemen, but for what we're doing, what else is there? What else are there out there to protect our individual freedoms, rights, prosperity, and self-determination? There's nothing. There's no other movement out there. And you should know that Saskatchewan is starting a Saskatchewan Prosperity Project as well. And interestingly enough, I just heard the other day, BC is doing it as well. And you should know as well that northern BC, with the Indigenous folks living up there, they all want an energy corridor. And guess what? They're aligned with Alberta on this as well. So these are some of the ways in which we can resist the WEF UN agenda. We have to. It's important. Our forefathers did fight for our independence, and we can do the same thing. We can win this ideological war. Absolutely.
Can Tanner speak to the financial benefits to the people of Alberta if Alberta is independent, such as income tax and property tax?
Yeah, did you have one ready?
Not,
I thought I said, yeah, I thought we talked about that already, but you want
We did.
okay, wait.
We can say that.
Well, so just so you know, I'm just going to reiterate in case, because I've been in an audience as well before, and we all have to admit this. Right? You hear something, or you're looking at your cell phone and you're distracted. You haven't heard something. So I'm just going to repeat. We right now overfund our pension plan by $3 billion a year. Independence puts that $3 billion in the pockets of the pensioners. We're taxed $55 to $60 billion a year. We get back 27. As an independent nation, your income tax will go down to 8 to 10%, and we retain all of that wealth. And as well, that wealth permits us to eliminate or at least dramatically reduce property taxes. So I hope that answers the question. We've done all of these economic studies. We know that's true.
I guess that was complete proof that I was not listening. This says at the top, for the first time people, what form of currency?
It's your favorite.
It is. I like this one. Gold standard is what I like.
Well, I think it's a clap.
They like gold standard. At present, we have a problem. The problem is that government can do what they want with our currency. They can inflate it, they can deflate it. The Bank of Canada can buy bonds, the Bank of Canada can sell bonds, they can manipulate the currency and the money to whatever aims they want. But of course, a very small group of individuals who are operating this massive machine often have interests and aims that are not the same as you, or not the same as your aims, and they're not the same as my aims. And so that leads to a problem. Right now, we're suffering under inflation. We're suffering under asset inflation. We're suffering under all of these problems that have been created in one place and one place only, at the printing press. And so what we're trying to procure for Alberta, what we want to see in Alberta, is a currency, is a monetary system where the government, or where a few select individual bureaucrats are not able to manipulate the currency for their aims or for their objectives. Instead, what we want, as history proves, is a hard currency, a stable currency, and a currency that allows you to predict most accurately what the future is going to hold. So today you're working. In 30 years, you're going to be retired. Now, you want to know, in order to accurately plan for the future, what the currency is going to look like in the future. And so we believe that gold, for example, in this, what we believe is that gold does this best. It's hard to manipulate gold. The gold standard that was introduced in America in the early 1900s won't work because the government or the Fed could still manipulate it. And indeed, during the Great Depression, they did manipulate it, which led to this massive deflation and meant that there was a crush, a squeeze, a tightening on the economy that left a quarter or whatever it was of Americans out of work, millions and millions out of work. So you need a system where government and the money are separate, they're different, so that it allows you to most accurately predict for the future. And we believe gold does that. How we achieve that is a different discussion. We can talk after. It takes a little bit longer to discuss, but on the whole, that's what we believe is possible. Even with bills now, there is new technology that's been, it's not coming out, it is out, that actually fuses gold with bills, like paper bills. And so it allows you to pay for groceries, not with a brick of gold, because nobody's going to do that, but with a bill that actually has gold infused into it. It doesn't flake off, it doesn't deteriorate, et cetera, et cetera. So who knows what the future holds? But in my opinion, the return to sound money is perhaps one of the most fundamental reasons that we actually need independence. Because when a society is hammered by bad money, by weak money, history shows that the society falls. Rome fell because the currency in large part was debased, or Rome in large part fell because the currency was becoming fraudulent. But if you have a hard money, if you have a hard currency, then history seems to show that the society is not only successful, but it flourishes to a remarkable degree. So we're proponents of a gold standard.
You might be interested to know that in 1915, if you had $100, it would be worth $4 now. There's inflation for you. The other thing I want you to think about is, well, we're not financial advisors, but when it gets close to having a referendum on independence, you're going to have to ask yourself, what's going to happen with the value of my money? Because remember, Alberta is such a massive contributor to the wealth of this country. When Alberta is no longer part of Canada, the value of the Canadian dollar will plummet, probably to 40 cents compared to the US dollar right now. So you might want to be considering at some point in a few years, putting your Canadian dollars into other precious metals, gold, something that will retain its value, or a currency that will, another world currency that won't be affected by a secessionist movement in Alberta.
I think Cameron said yesterday the Alberta dollar could be called Ralph Bucks. Could you speak to Alberta being landlocked?
Sure. Both Tanner and I talked about this particular subject, and because I seem to talk more, I'm going to let Tanner take this one on this time.
And I'll be brief, so if you want to add more, you can. At present, we're policy locked. It's important to make that distinction. At present, we're policy locked. So even though officially, and I'm using the air quotes, we have access to port, and indeed we do ship goods to port, think of all that we can't do right now because of all of these invasive laws like Bill C-69. We have to sell our oil at a discount because we can't transport it properly. You see, our oil and so on doesn't go to port. It's a common misconception. Instead, the vast majority of not only our oil, but 90+% of all our goods in Alberta are traded with the States until they go south. But if you read, for example, the Customs Tariff 2022, the federal law that, or the federal booklet, I'm calling it a booklet, it's a Bible, that outlines the rules on tariffs in the country, you see that it's 1,600 pages long. So who knows what's in that book? It's, you know, you get past the first 3 pages and you're so bored you can't read anymore. But it shows how you have this massive bureaucracy that works almost in the shadows to manipulate how we're able to trade, even while we're in Confederation. And so, like I mentioned, we have to sell our oil at a discount. We want to get it to the Gulf Coast, but we can't because you have rules like Bill C-69. And so no investor wants to invest, even though we have access to port, even though we have access to all of this oil. People are scared and they're gun shy because they're worried if they invest in 5 years, the government might shut them down, and all that sunk investment, those hundreds of billions of dollars or whatever it might be, will then have been lost. So we have this problem right now in Confederation. Can you, however, migrate around it? Can you navigate it when independent? The answer is yes. Firstly, I would like to just quickly mention that I do not believe this will be an issue, and I mean that honestly. Mutually beneficial trade is mutually beneficial. If the government of Canada is going to try and hammer us with blocking our access to port, they're going to do so, in my opinion, before we become independent, not after. Because it doesn't earn them anything to do it after except spite. But that, to be entirely honest, I can't see that being a scenario. It would harm them, well, it would harm them a lot, to be entirely honest, before they might try to. They might try as a tactic to frighten Albertans or scare us back into submission. Who knows what it might be, but then they might try it. In my opinion, that's all the reason more for independence. If you have a federal government that doesn't have your best interests in heart, then why do you want to remain with the federal government? But nonetheless, what could you do to try and navigate around that situation? How could you play ball with the government if they wanted to play rough? Well, you could play rough too. For example, you could turn off the taps. That is a credible threat. We often hear that we import all of this gasoline from other nations. Now, we import some, but the actual reality is we don't import a lot. Alberta has already saturated the Western market with oil and so on. So that's that. And if we decided to turn off the taps tomorrow to BC, they would be in a lot of trouble for gasoline, a lot of trouble. We also ship a lot of oil from Alberta, from Hardisty, Edmonton, down, and it just kind of goes into America a little bit. It makes a stop in Chicago, those big refineries in the Midwest, and then it comes back up into Toronto and Quebec and so on, et cetera, et cetera. And there they refine it too. Now, Quebec does import some oil and some gasoline, but not enough. Nowhere near enough. They rely heavily on Alberta to produce or to give them the oil that they need to live comfortably. And so if you turned off the taps even a little bit, it would immediately catch their attention, immediately. So that's a credible threat. The second would be you could, in my opinion, block access from the Vancouver port to other locations and jurisdictions in Canada. I mean it this way. The Vancouver port is the third largest port in terms of tonnage in the continent. It's huge. It's massive. TVs, beef, computers, automobiles, all of these goods come to the Vancouver port and they flow out and they flow in, et cetera, et cetera. It's a huge port. It's phenomenal to see. But of course, all of those goods that are shipped to the port and all of those goods that come in from the port to be imported, they have to flow through Alberta to get to the eastern provinces. And so if Canada decided to play rough and said no port access for you, well, then we could say, fine, we're not going to allow a single good to come through Alberta that comes to or from the port until you give us access. You could put tariffs on them. You could stop overflights. You could do all of these restrictions and all of these measures that would force Canada to seriously think about what they're doing. And you must realize they're not, we wouldn't only be fighting with Canada, or Canada more accurately, wouldn't only be fighting with us, they'd be fighting with business, and very powerful business. They'd be fighting with Cargill, with G3, with those massive grain terminals at the port themselves. They'd be fighting with all of these oil companies that have vested interests in oil and in Alberta's economic health. They'd be fighting with those in Montreal, with those in Toronto who need our oil, who need our goods in order to survive and to live profitably. They'd be fighting with all of these individuals who are exceedingly powerful. For what? So before independence, that fight may happen. Who knows for sure? After independence, I do not see it occurring. I firmly believe that mutually beneficial trade is mutually beneficial. And there is no reason whatsoever for Canada to act in a malevolent way towards us once we declare our independence. It makes no sense whatsoever. But even if they did, and if they really didn't give you access to port, which I believe, I honestly don't believe that. If you had to for a while, Alberta could be self-sufficient. We are in the Eden of the Western world, and we have the ability, if we need to, shut in. I don't want to do that. That's a last effort. But if you had to do it, you could. But I really don't believe we'll need to. So that's just a short answer. There's much more to say, but yeah.
Well, I'm going to add to the Tanner's short answer actually as well. Yeah, I agree with Tanner. It's not in the interest of the rest of Canada to embargo Alberta, and I agree. I think sensible negotiations will occur, and at some point in the hopefully near future, there will be a different federal government as well. Not a federal government that will be a federal government that will support Alberta indefinitely, because you know what happens when federal governments change. Nevertheless, the point that I'm getting at here is that there is one other issue that's relevant, and we don't rely on this because we're not fans of the United Nations, given what they're doing to us. But UN article, or the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, Article 124 and 125, was intended to give landlocked countries access to the sea. It's not enforceable, but morally it's correct. I also think as well that we would have tremendous US support for getting our product to market. And who knows what will happen with Alberta independence. The dominoes could fall that Saskatchewan and Manitoba join with us. Then you could see we would have access to Churchill as well. And like I said earlier, First Nations in northern BC are totally aligned, 100% aligned with Alberta with respect to an energy corridor to either Prince Rupert or Kitimat.
How are we going to work with the Indigenous?
Yeah, that's another good question. Well, like I said, on our board, we have Lawrence Corderell, who's a former First Nations chief and a successful businessman. And we have one constitutional lawyer, Leighton Gray, who himself is First Nations, and Jeff Rath, who's also a constitutional lawyer, and he has been looking after Indigenous affairs for nearly 30 years, and he's won cases at the level of the Supreme Court. So those three gentlemen believe that there's about a 90 to 95, or that they can bring about 90 to 95% of the Indigenous population to independence, because the benefit for them is far greater than it is now. They continue to be controlled by the federal government through the Indian Act. They want out from under it, and they can't get out from under it. They're not happy with UNDRIP as well, which is the United Nations Declaration on Independence, on the rights of Indigenous people. They're not happy with that. And for example, Dale Swampy, who's the president of the National Coalition of Chiefs, as well as Stephen Buffalo, who's the president and CEO of the Indian Resource Council of Canada, are very much in favor of Alberta leading the charge. In other words, they don't mind if Alberta remains in Confederation, but they recognize that if you're going to fix Canada, Alberta has to first have this referendum on independence and force the negotiations that can benefit other provinces as well. So there's tremendous support from the Indigenous population already. And we're fortunate to have 3 individuals on our board that understand this in far greater detail than myself.
So just one more question here, but just to let you know, if you wrote a question and I didn't have time to ask it, we do have a frequently asked questions tab on our website, so perhaps the answers are there already. We do endeavor to get these questions onto the website as well if we haven't asked it. So the last question, how many of you will leave here today without a membership? Remember what I said about Martin Luther King Jr.? The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. We are facing those challenges right now. We're facing so much controversy. Gone is our trust in all levels of government. What we thought to be our God-given right and those guaranteed by the Constitution and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms have been trampled.